So I just want to welcome everybody and tell you how great it is to see you here. My name is Susan Pigott, and I'm going to chair the session today. I'm currently the executive in residence at Ashoka Canada, and I guess on that note I should just do a big shout out to Ryerson for becoming the first Changemaker campus in Canada, joining over 30 in the United States. It's a very, very difficult designation, and I came to Ashoka after it was almost a fait accompli, and I sort of in fear and trepidation said, which university is it going to be? And when I heard it was Ryerson, I was just thrilled. So that's great. This session today on perspectives in social innovation is being jointly hosted by the Faculty of Community Services and the Ryerson MBA program. And I think we should take a moment to thank Jameen Aslam and Marilyn Struthers in absentia, because Marilyn has the flu, for all the work they did organizing it. So thanks a lot. Social innovation is a topic of great interest to both these programs at Ryerson. The Faculty of Community Services prepares students to work in a range of social issues across many human services and also urban and rural planning. These students in the Faculty of Community Services are on the front lines. You know this because some of you are them, but this is something that I was asked to say. Front lines of funding and delivering solutions to social problems in communities. The John C. Eaton Chair of Innovation and Entrepreneurship is held by Marilyn Struthers currently, and it's housed in the School of Child and Youth Care at the Faculty of Community Services. The Ryerson MBA program, as those of you who are in that program here know, has a strong focus on social responsibility and entrepreneurship, with opportunities for students to learn about many areas related to social innovation and social entrepreneurship. One example is the team of Ryerson MBA students who competed for the Hulk Prize in Boston this year. This year's challenge was to ask teams to build sustainable and scalable social enterprises to address non-communicable diseases in slums. Symposiums such as this, I believe this is the first actually of its kind, hopefully create opportunities for growing understanding between students with varied experiences and skills, collaborating to address social challenges, and each bringing their unique perspectives and approaches to innovation. I think, as everybody here knows, there is an unprecedented interest in social entrepreneurship and social innovation in this country, in this province at this time. Some of us have been discussing why this might be the case, and maybe our panelists will speak a bit about it, but simply put, changing values, a sense of urgency related to seemingly intractable social and environmental problems, technology which supports rapid communication across different sectors are all factors, we believe, enabling and underpinning the excitement about the possibility of finding creative new solutions. Now, definitions of social innovation abound. I'm just going to ground us, and the panel can agree or disagree with this, with the very simple, straightforward working definition of the Center for Social Innovation. Social innovation refers to new ideas that resolve existing social, cultural, economic, and environmental challenges. So today, to share their perspectives on social innovation, we are fortunate to have four really excellent panelists. I'm going to introduce them very briefly in the order which they will be speaking. Then each panelist is going to speak for about 10 minutes. Then we'll have a little bit of dialogue amongst the panelists, and then we'll leave lots of time for our audience to ask questions. So speaking first, and I'll just introduce you all at once so that we don't have to disrupt the flow, is Rick Young. I think Rick Young is known to many of you in the room, one of Canada's leading thinkers and practitioners of social change. He's the founder of EYE, the Social Project Studio, and very interestingly for you Ryersonians, he's the distinguished visiting professor of social innovation housed in the Faculty of Community Services. The second speaker is going to be Alison Hewitt. Alison is a leader of the social innovation programs at MARS, including the Ontario node of the national initiative, Social Innovation Generation, SIG at MARS, which is becoming very well known, not just here in Toronto, but right across the country. The next speaker will be Raju Agarwal, the Executive Director at One Prosper International, a global crowdfunding platform to support small farmers in India. And then our final speaker will be Michael Hyatt, Executive Chairman and co-founder of Blue Cat Networks and a recipient of the Top 40 Under 40 Award. So I want you to all welcome our panelists. And with that, I'm going to sit down and hand things over to Rick, and you're going to have the great amusement of watching me try to signal when 10 minutes is up so that we can move on to the next panelist. Wish me luck. Rick.
Good luck. Susan said that you're all clustered on this side because that's closest to the exit, which is where I used to sit when I took classes. Many years ago, I was on the faculty of something called the Boston College Center for Corporate Citizenship. And Boston College, at a time when the term civil society was very popular, like now social innovation has become very popular, had a academic panel on civil society, and there was a press release that went out after the panel that said, faculty on panel failed to come to agreement on meaning of civil society, but agree aggressively that academia has a large role to play. I think sometimes it's actually dangerous for a field when the language becomes very soft and imprecise. I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what I mean by social innovation and maybe provoke something of a discussion here. First of all, innovation. For most of us, and certainly in our era, innovation sounds like a good word. It sounds like it means something good. This is actually a recent historical phenomenon. There was in the 16th century, King Edward VI issued a proclamation against those who doeth innovate. Innovation was considered deviant, evil, and punishable. And it has been considered that in many cultures throughout much of history. Because, now why would that be the case? Because innovation was actually about challenging an established order. It was only, sort of 19th, 20th century where innovation started to be associated with forms of economic progress and so on, that it started to be seen in a positive way. And more recently, as you'll understand, I'm going to use language from my era, in a groovy light or a cool light. But it's interesting also to think about the opposition to innovation. Innovation is always opposed by conservative forces. Now those needn't only be politically conservative forces, they can be managerially conservative forces, and conservative forces exist in all domains and across all spectrums of politics. So bureaucrats, pragmatists, inside corporations, inside governments, inside social sector organizations are often very opposed to innovation, though they may embrace the term, because, in fact, despite our claims for the need for change, the societies, organizations, and institutions oppose change. Innovation is a challenge to the established order. That is why it has been opposed. Now let me show you what I mean by innovation, and then I try to use that to get to what I mean by social innovation. And this is what I mean by innovation. This is my cell phone. Not the technology. I mean, obviously some of the technology was innovative, but the disruption that this technology brought about how the disruption to an established pattern, established economy, established institutions, established policies and telecommunications, this is probably at the heart of the biggest revolution that we've seen, certainly that we've seen in my time. And innovation, I'm somebody who's interested in social change, so innovation is for me the lever that interests me most in terms of bringing about large-scale change to established systems, established orders. That's what I mean by this. So we think about what this is. The real innovation is not in the technology. It is in everything that it took for this, at one time, very weird idea. I think it was McKinsey who did a study when this technology was just emergent, and they said, yeah, it could be successful. We might be able to sell up to 10 million of these units. I don't mean Apple, but cell phones around the world. Nobody could anticipate how the journey from the margins to the mainstream that this would represent. Disruption is what I mean by innovation. Absolute disruption of existing orders of things. Now, okay, so we may say, well, that happened in the marketplace, but can that happen in the social sector? Although I would say, I was just in Kenya in the summer, and I was hanging out with some Maasai friends of mine. A friend who was guarding our camp with his bow and arrow. That was the technology that he used. But while he was guarding the camp with his bow and arrow, he was also on the phone to his wife to check on, and you would know about this, to check on how the goats were doing. And he did all of his banking by phone. So this has penetrated so far. It is such a transformation in the way that we live. Okay, so is that just because it's something in the marketplace? Is that just because it's commercial? No, I don't think so. If I was sitting here 25 years ago, I guarantee you I would have been smoking. And some of you may have been upset by that, but none of you would have had the nerve to say it. The social transformation of smoking being everywhere to smoking being nowhere in public places is as significant, I think, as this transformation. That is a real system-altering social innovation. And by the way, a friend and colleague of yours and mine, Beverly Slocum, who's with Ashoka, who's coming up to actually stay with me in a couple of weeks, was the co-author of the very first legislation in North America, I think in the world, to ban smoking in public places. I'm a big believer in social change. I thought she was completely nuts. I thought it would never happen. The idea that we could have seen this normative shift in this period of time with a behavior that is addictive is extraordinary. What real innovation means to me is the creation of the new normal. If you think about the use of this technology, it wasn't a revolution. When I was a young guy, I was very interested in revolution. I'm much more interested in innovation as the lever for significant social change. What it does is it creates a new normal and a normative shift. So it's not technology, it's actually the human and social dynamics that are engaged. Now, because innovation is not always a good thing, because the established order is sometimes a useful thing, we don't need to venerate innovation. We need to venerate outcomes and the outcomes that we seek. At this moment in history, to go to the point that you're making, Susan, why is social innovation something that we're all obsessed with at the moment? Because we are living in a moment in history where our systems are very stuck, where the sustainability of the planet and the social equity of the planet is not, we cannot go on with existing systems because they are pointing towards, they are already creating, and they're pointing towards very unacceptable and unfortunate outcomes. So we need to disrupt systems, and the institutions that we've got, the organizations and institutions that we've got in our society, from governments to, I would say, the social sector and beyond, are poorly adapted to meeting the historical challenges of our moment in time. We have poorly adapted institutions for attempting to accomplish the large-scale transformations that we need for all of our safety, survivability, and social equity. Whether we want to call it social justice or not, that's another debate. Now, I became very interested in this concept of innovation, and in 1999, when I was doing some work in the corporate social responsibility field, which by the way, I think is limited in terms of its ability to bring about large-scale change, I was engaged by DuPont Canada, not the kind of company that I knew anything about. And what blew my mind, working with that company, was encountering for the first time in my life, because I was a downtown Toronto guy. I had, cool offices, and I worked in a creative class, all that stuff. But here I was in a large established corporation that had the most profound culture of problem solving and possibility seeking that I had ever seen. This culture could wrap its head around big questions. It could live without answers for a long time. And it could address large-scale problems. And it had, throughout its 200-year history, made leaps. They had made leaps. And I kept thinking to myself, if this was the culture that existed in the social domain, where I was working on problems like, reducing the spread of AIDS, reducing climate change, global poverty, community sustainability, early childhood development, whatever. I thought if we had this culture in the social domain, when I say social, I mean social and political domain where I was working, we would be a hell of a lot farther than we were. And I became fascinated by the dynamics of that culture, and that's where we started the social innovation movement. It started with DuPont and the work that we did, because at the time the phrase was around, but there was no field, there was no discipline. We tried to give some. We said, can we create a field called social innovation? What? Now, for those of you who sort of occupy the left, and certainly for me who comes from a kind of hippie left in the 60s and 70s, it's very odd to think about looking to the corporate sector for that as a handbook of the revolution. But the truth is that in our era, I think that we have seen larger scale change and more seriousness, more rigor, and I would venture more generosity about creating real cultures of change than in the social sector. It was to DuPont that I looked, and then beyond DuPont to those places and sectors where real innovation, real disruption, the cultures, the structures, the competencies necessary for breakthrough had been created. Now we think that this happens in the social sector. The social sector tends to occupy the moral high ground and say, we have the causes, therefore we're the good guys. But here's the point and the challenge that I want to make. Every social and environmental problem that gets named, that moves from the sort of vague margins to becoming an accepted social problem, actually creates an industry around it. That industry creates an economy. That economy, in these days where social innovation has become cool, is actually the idea of social innovators, and there is a big difference between social enterprise and social innovation, and we have blurred it. When we started the work at DuPont, Ashoka was in its early days. I looked carefully at the work of Ashoka. I was really intrigued by it. But I said that the kind of social innovation that we want to focus on is the social innovation that will allow us to address system-altering, large-scale, intractable problems. But now we name these large-scale intractable problems, and we create ecosystems of organizations that work to address them. Everybody's saying we want to change the world. Each one of those ecosystems or economic systems has revenue flowing through it. I'm doing work in Winnipeg on early childhood development. Depending on how you do the arithmetic, you could say that it's a $250 to $350 million a year economy. There are many organizations, let's say they're all doing valid work. But the truth is, in 20 years, the outcomes have not changed one bit. So there is no disruption to the existing system. You get a lot of glory for those people who are saying they're working in it. You get a lot of people defending their positions within that economy. But if we are serious about outcomes and not about romanticizing and valorizing the entrepreneurs and innovators, the practitioners and the practice, but if we're serious about outcomes, which we have to be in our era because so much is at stake, then we better get serious about what it takes to transform outcomes at a serious scale. And in that case, I want to say that the fundamental idea of social innovation that I believed in 15 years ago, I still believe in, which is that it should be serious about focusing on system-altering disruptions, get serious about the work of disruption, get serious about creating the structures, cultures, competencies, and incomes and investments that are necessary to bring about large-scale and transformational change. And I don't think that the emergent field of social innovation has come close to doing that.
Great. Wow, what an opening. Thank you very much, Rick. I think we're just going to keep moving along because I have about a million questions, but I don't want to abuse my prerogative as chair here. And I think it would be interesting now, Alison, as you're starting to, as you're thinking about your comments, if you want to reference any of it, it's sort of fun to build on each other's comments a bit. I know you have your own contribution, but
I can
feel
build.
free.
I can build.
Alison Hewitt.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm actually really thrilled that there's both business students here and students from Canadian Social Services, because I really want to live in a world that's about and not about or. So the fact that both of you are here is actually a wonderful start. So the work that Rick was talking about, what came out of that, among many things, is a book called Getting to Maybe, which I would recommend that those of you interested in this field look at. And Rick is it the forward you wrote for that, Rick?
Yeah.
So the forward Rick wrote for that. So, and part of that is one of the authors was a woman by the name of Frances Wesley, who's a professor at Waterloo. And with the McConnell Family Foundation and the Plan Institute out in Vancouver and Mars, we created something called SIG, or Social Innovation Generation, which is a national network looking at some of the big issues that Rick is talking about, or at least trying to do that. I'm going to tell you, however, a slightly different story. I'm going to tell you the story of Mars, which is just not far from here. So Mars was really set up to help companies commercialize. So you have great ideas coming out of academia or out of the many wonderful hospitals we have here. Canadians are brilliant researchers, not so brilliant in turning that into companies, or even better, turning that into positive health outcomes for Canadians. So how do we do that? And so it's set up through this concept of convergence innovation, bringing together intellectual property lawyers and other folks to help people accelerate in what they say is grow great companies, which is about creating jobs and creating wealth and finding the next disruptive innovation, mostly focused around the technology component of it. So how do we create Canada as a leader in the innovation economy? And in 2007, they brought me on to try to say, how do we focus more on social innovation as we look at this larger picture of technology innovation? This was back in 2007. And so I started to do wonderful things, not thinking about and, but thinking about or, like researching, social entrepreneurship 101. And I would develop a whole course around that. And then it sort of occurred to me, well, Mars runs a program called Entrepreneurship 101. Every Wednesday, it's free. You can attend or you can watch online, and you'll learn things like how to write a business plan, understanding marketing, and the room is full. It starts in the fall, so it runs the academic year, and the room is full of about 400 people, but 8,000 people are registered online. So you can come out, hang out with 400 people, or you can join them online when the kids go to sleep at night, or whatever it is you have to do, and there's about 8,000 people registered. And so it kind of occurred to me that I was being stupid, right? Why am I doing this little thing off to the side for a couple of people interested in this? I actually want to go to those thousands of people and get them to think about, as they're creating businesses, as they're creating ventures, that they consider how they can create social impact along with how they can sustain a business. So that's what I did. So our theory of change is really around this mainstream integration of social innovation, not off to the side in the cheap seats. And Susan didn't tell you my bio, but I grew up in the nonprofit world. My social innovation is 211. Anybody's ever called 211? That was my idea and something that I brought to Canada. So I have a lot of experience in that field, and I've been really having a good time at Mars as I work with people I wouldn't normally meet with. And it's one of those places where you take the elevator, you need a universal translator because they all speak different languages, but it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to tell you a story about 3 different groups that I've worked with. One is called Jump Math, started by a guy called John Myton, who's an Ashoka Fellow. John started off tutoring kids in math, He had trouble in math, even though he's actually went on to do a PhD. And if anybody's seen the movie Good Will Hunting? So he's like the math consultant on Good Will Hunting. So he's like a total math genius guy. So John was helping kids understand math, and he sort of figured out what's actually going on here is the kids are being told they don't have the math gene. Oh, you're really smart, you're the math gene. You, not so much, I worry about you. He's like, what? There is no math gene. This is ridiculous stuff. So he started this whole program of scaffolding. You got to understand the fundamentals and build up. And when John came to see me, he had a bunch of problems. He was the founder. He thought he was in the way, so a smart founder. He had some problems with his board. They were sort of mostly his friends. He wanted a bigger one. And he wanted to generate income because he was pretty reliant on grants and donations, and he wanted to sell books, and he didn't know how to do that. All terrific. But really, what John wanted to do was change how we educate kids. He wanted to disruptively innovate. I don't think that's actually a phrase, but he wanted to innovate in such a way that we disrupted the education system. But John, as an entrepreneur, can sort of annoy some people, especially those who are traditional educators, when he says you're doing it all wrong, because that's what he says, right? You're doing it all wrong, and you should be doing it differently. And so there was a lot of pushback between the Ministries of Education and John. And we played kind of an intermediary role to see how we can think about how we can actually teach kids differently. How do we disrupt the current education system? So he is what I would call a social innovator, someone who is thinking at the systems level. But I also have a lot of other folks who come to see me who are not necessarily at that level. They may call themselves social entrepreneurs, they may be living in the world of social enterprise, but they're not at the kind of level that Rick is talking about. They're often people who are in their 20s who are saying, I don't want to make a lot of money, I don't want to go to Bay Street and profit maximize and give back later in life. I actually want to work and live my values. I want to make money and make a social impact. And I think I can do that. And can you help me do that? So to help them do that, I'm working with the province of Ontario on creating hybrid legislation. I'm looking at how we finance social purpose work differently. Tomorrow at Mars, we have a big conference called Impact Ontario, where we're bringing together impact investors. So these are people who, yes, they will donate through one pocket, but in another pocket, they would make traditional investments about maximizing. We're actually saying, will you consider making a donation, making a contribution, an investment that's not a donation and that's not about profit maximizing, but allowing you to invest for a financial and a social return, and helping people quantify that and figure that out. So there's a whole new field of impact investing that is just exploding and very interesting. Do you have much time?
Got time for your third story.
Thank you very much. My third story is a group called Bitstrips. So Bitstrips are animators, and they come into Mars through the technology area because they have developed a different way to do cartooning. It's pretty wonderful, and they're thinking, okay, so we're looking for an exit strategy, maybe Pixar, maybe Disney, maybe this is the way for us to go. So they come in to get help with the technology. No sense of social stuff at all. But because we're asking ventures to look at how they can create economic and social impact, we say to them, so what's going on here? What are you really doing? Well, we're creating avatars. Well, that's cool. Do you think school kids would be interested in this? Well, what do you mean? Well, I don't really know, because ambiguity is pretty wonderful in this field. You don't have to know right up front. I don't really know, but let's play around with it. So they do a test with the Toronto Board of Education. Toronto Board loves it because what happens is kids begin to use the animation to tell stories of being bullied. They don't talk to their teachers, they don't talk to their parents, they don't talk to their peers, but in fact, cartooning is a really fun, free, safe way to tell stories that you're not comfortable telling otherwise. And so the TDSB says, let's use this tool for a bullying campaign all across the whole system. And they do, and the results are incredible. So what happens? TDSB buys a license for every kid. Then the province tunes on to this. So the province now buys a license for every kid. So what's happened is we've created another market opportunity for Bitstrips, new business line called Bitstrips for Schools. They had no sense that their product could have a social impact, but in fact it does. And in fact it's very promising. Although it's pretty early days, we're really excited about the opportunities for how to use this tool to create economic impact and social impact. So those are the stories that I thought I would put out there and some of the work that I do at Mars every day.
Thanks, Allison. That's great. Okay, our next panelist, Raju, you're up next.
Thank you, Susan. I thought I would start with a little bit of background. I had visited India when I was a kid, and I remember traveling by train, and at many railway stations, I would see families lying on the railway platform. Their bodies were emaciated. I had never seen people whose bodies were physically emaciated before, and I felt moved. So many years later, I again visited India while pursuing my MBA, and some children were begging on the street, and a girl approached me holding a baby in her arms. So I asked her, "Why are you not going to school?" She said, "I would love to go to school, but I can't because my mother works as a servant and I have to look after my baby brother." So I realized that there are people that are struggling just to fulfill their basic needs. So fast forward to a few years ago, I was talking with an old friend. He said to me, "You're always talking about this stuff. Why don't you do something?" At the time, I was reading a book by John Wood, Leaving Microsoft to Change the World, and I felt inspired. So I did some research, and I discovered that the majority of people living in poverty were small farmers that are dependent upon their crops for food and income. So I then happened to read an article by a Stanford University graduate working in India as an academic fellow about this innovative drip irrigation technology designed specifically for small farmers. So I contacted the founder of this company and I asked him how I could help. So he told me that there were two challenges to the wider adoption of drip. The first was awareness, and the second was affordability. The $400 cost of a drip kit is prohibitive for people earning less than $2 per day. So I felt that I could help to bridge that gap. So I founded One Prosper in 2010 with the goal of providing a sustainable solution to the problem of poverty and malnutrition. So One Prosper is focused on the problem of poverty and malnutrition in India, where 42% of children below age 5 are malnourished. So our solution is to empower people to grow more food. The challenge is water scarcity. So in South Asia, most of the river systems are fed by mountain glaciers. Because of climate change, the ice is thinning, so there's less water runoff. So as a result, the groundwater table is declining. So the question is, how do you grow more food with less water? The traditional type of irrigation is flood irrigation, where you fill a bucket of water and pour it on your field. The problem with that is that 90% of the water evaporates. So drip irrigation delivers small amounts of water directly to the plant root, resulting in a significant increase in crop yields. So One Prosper has now provided 320 small farmers with drip irrigation kits, enabling them to increase their incomes by between 50 and 70%. So, as an example, I'll share with you the story of one of our beneficiaries. His name is Yadagiri. So, Yadagiri is a small farmer in the state of Andhra Pradesh. He earns $2 per day by growing eggplant on his 2-acre field. He has 3 daughters. Because of the limited amount of water in his well, he could cultivate only half an acre. So after he installed a 1-acre drip kit, he was able to cultivate 1 acre, doubling his income. As a result, he can feed his 3 daughters more nutritious food and send them to school. So we've now supported over 300 small farmers. So where do we go from here? So we've just launched a crowdfunding website. So our strategy is to drive growth through crowdfunding. Anyone can go onto our website, sponsor a small farmer, and see their impact. And lastly, we're getting into education. Thanks to the support, thanks to Michael's support, we're building a state-of-the-art school in a very backward region where people will be able to get, where children will be able to get a really high standard of education. So that's, in a nutshell, that's an overview of One Prospect. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. Michael, over to you.
You know, disruption's been happening for a very long time, and if you think about people disrupting things, it's kind of interesting. Your point, which I thought was really well made. You take, I was thinking of a time where disruption kind of somewhat, not really modern age, but take 1859, so let's do a bit of history. There was a guy in West Virginia at the time named John Brown and his sons, and the time of 1859, you know, slavery was legal in the U.S., and it was a time of great consternation in the United States where there were the abolitionists, the people that wanted slavery to end, and the people that certainly did not want it to end because it was very huge economy picking cotton. In fact, the cotton industry was bigger than the whole oil industry is now on a per capita basis. It's massive. And John Brown and his sons were fierce abolitionists, wanted to stop slavery. So what they did, they decided that they would try to take over a place called Harper's Ferry in 1859. And him and his 3 sons, he had a total of 9 sons, I believe, and they attacked Harper's Ferry, took it hostage. His sons were killed, and he was taken captive by Colonel Lee, who became General Lee later in the war, the Confederate side. He was hung. He was tried and hung. And if you really take a look at what he did, his disruption in an almost social way, if you think about it, to abolish slavery was very interesting. He thought the slaves would rise up and help him, but they didn't, because I think they were so pre-programmed to be very fearful. But they used it, there was a song the North used to sing about John Brown, and it actually created a rallying cry to abolish slavery. My great-grandfather, Thaddeus, funded John Brown. He was put in jail for it, and he was let out by Lincoln later on. Lincoln, of course, becomes president in 1860, president-elect, and the first thing happens, he passes the Emancipation Proclamation trying to free the slaves, and the next thing that happens is an attack on Fort Sumner, and 13 states decide to leave. That must have been a bit of a shock and social change, I would say, and that creates the Civil War. And if you think about it, disruption has always occurred in great pains. I mean, it sounds very strange, but it was 1960s. We didn't want black kids to go to white kids in school in the South. You can recall, like, terror. Right? We have social change going on in the U.S. now, and in a different way that people are going to get on the wrong side of history for. I didn't have the pathways that a lot of people have in this room. I left my school, and I started a business with my brother because we were generally poor. So I had to go make money because I didn't have any choice. So I started a software companies before the internet. I actually went to school before the interweb, as George Bush would call it, was around. And I used to mail discs to people. I used to remember discs. I used to mail discs, and then I called the person up and said, "Have you installed the disc?" And then I said, "Thing called a disc. You put it in the computer." I hadn't seen any of these things before, I know. So I didn't have a car, I didn't have a cell phone, and I didn't have the internet at school. And, you know, there's been incredible revolutions of change in technologies. There's been 3, now $4 trillion spaces. The first was the invention of the microprocessor in the 50s. The next was the invention of the home computer. And the next was the internet, which is freely available as the commercial internet. The newest one, as you know, you're sitting in it right now, which you aptly put, which is mobile. And this idea of anything not tethered down or wearable technology is changing the way we communicate, the way we connect, the way we do business. It's unfathomable to someone who comes to Ryerson today that you could not have had the internet, that you do not have Twitter or whatever you did. You know, it's a very strange thing for you. And the way you do things and the way you see things are very, very different. But in saying that, my path to social change, and I think, you know, Raju here certainly is, you know, the guy who's the most impressive here. You know, is I decided to build companies, create hundreds of millions in value, and then take some of that money, my family, we put millions of dollars into a foundation. Then I take that money and I invest into the stock market. I'm decent at that. And then every year I donate all the cream out of that because the government makes me donate a certain percentage every year to a foundation. The question is that I stumbled upon is, how do you actually give away that much money every year, and then what the hell do you do with it? It's actually very difficult. It's not that easy. And you would say, my God, I can't believe this thing you got, Hyatt. Like, why can't you just kind of run around and find some good things? It's actually very difficult to figure out where that money goes and what people are doing with it. We created the largest scholarship foundation for people in poverty to go to Seneca because I thought people could get a job there. We actually funded an entirely new program for Dress for Success because my family's funding women who are in abject poverty getting their first job. But once we gave them a resume and gave them new clothes, these women had never networked, so we created this whole network and moved everything together. So we're trying to do something, you know. This is very interesting. This thing, you know, we've been funding farms now for a year, and every month or a couple of months I buy new farms. I literally get pictures of these families with their kids, and I'm like, well, so what's happening with these kids? Are they going to school? We don't know. So we decided that we're going to try to build a school there for 150 kids in the region, and not for any reason, but you know. And then I, got all crazy and decided that we should put solar panels on it and try to make it internet and be all silly about it. So we have this big, very audacious goal to put a school there, and then we want to feed them and stuff. But I'm certainly not as well inclined as any of you in social change and things you're doing. It's probably you're way ahead of me. I'm a business guy. I have my current company I'm a chairman of, 300 employees and stuff, and I spend time, maybe you've seen it every week on CBC, I do the business news and that kind of stuff. And I think that what I will leave you with, I don't want to go on for too long, you guys have some questions, but I'll leave you with this. Life is short, and although I got the top 40 under 40 award, I'm 40 now, so I don't think I can use that anymore. I know, it's really shocking when you do. And the thing is that, life's short, and I'll tell you something that, making all this money, I'll tell you the shocking thing about it. The shocking part about it is that you realize suddenly there's no VIP lineup for the first time. You realize when you die, and I'm going to get esoteric on your ass now, but really when you die, none of us, I think we're all going to the same place. I think there's no VIP lineup for me. I can get into restaurants and bars better than most people, but certainly not passing it on. I mean, kings and pharaohs and people used to bury themselves with their armies and tombs, and people try to, but it really doesn't go anywhere. What I'm trying to say to you is that we don't actually have that much time to really do something. And the reason, it's funny because this strange white guy is working with this Indian guy, and we're trying to build, schools in India for no apparent reason, but we just want these people to have something. And that's literally what's happening. We're actually just trying to do something without any recognition, or the school's not going to be called the Michael Hyatt building. It's actually going to be called the One Prosper School, which makes a lot of sense. What I'll leave you with in social is that I think you can either get a job and build it the way you're saying, which is very interesting, which is I've never thought about getting a job and doing it social and making money. I've always gone out there and made the most amount of money I can and then try to affect change. And I think either way works. But what I will say is that, in life I think that we're all somewhat responsible for each other, and I also think that we have to do something, and I think we have to think about what that really is. And I also leave you with, we all think that we're 40 or maybe you're 20 or 30 and you're going to live to 80 or 90 or whatever. Well, we really don't quite know that. None of us have the right to much more than we have right now. And to affect change, you should probably live in the moment. As much as many people see the corporate side, let me just defend the corporate side for a second.
Just for a second.
Just for a second, is that, by the numbers, Bill Gates is actually and I think Rockefeller, the most profound philanthropist that ever existed. But Bill Gates attaches it in a very, very different way. He sees it as a process, as a machine, like he built Microsoft, but he's given away $36 billion to date. No matter what we say, it's pretty amazing, because he's trying to figure out how to stop malaria. I mean, he's quite an amazing man, and so is Buffett and the rest of them. I'll leave you with my view on a bit on the world, and I'll wrap it up, which is basically we're going through a time right now of a great rebalancing. For the very first time, you're seeing markets like India and China start to create middle classes where people for the first time are buying proteins. You're seeing Latin America come into its own. It's almost hitting $15,000 in the median income. You're seeing the whole world get rebalanced. There's certain, like the U.S. is not the big I am as much as it was anymore. It's not as important as it was, and that's a hard thing for people to kind of imagine, because at the end of the Second World War, America was the only kind of massive economy left standing. Everybody else was bombed out, and they started kind of reaching out globally. Now we're creating middle classes in places and bringing all these rural farmers in China in, and that's happened for over 30 years. And so big economies are starting everywhere in the world, and the internet has allowed a certain free and ubiquitous exchange of information to occur. And for the first time, we can truly have a global access to these farmers that can now trade. And one of the great things is that farmer is not going to be robbed on the way home because he can actually trade his crops on his phone. So there's a lot of change going on right now. And I think whether you approach it to you're getting your first job and you're going to have social change, or you're going to make money and affect social change. I mean, either way kind of works. But I'll leave it that, I found Raju, and because he's the nicest guy I've ever met, and he's really trying to do something. Whether we pass or fail, I don't know, but we're going for it. So we're pretty happy about that. But anyways, thanks for listening to me rant on. That funny.
Great. We're going to open it up in a minute for questions. We have lots of time now, and I do want to just ask our panelists to have an opportunity, or give them an opportunity to comment on some of the things each other have said. But I have a couple of things I just want to throw out too. I'm like Allison in that I came to social innovation. I didn't even know what it was for many, many years. I'm a social worker, and I've always been a passionate advocate for a better world, and I've always believed in systems change. And I used to be very much, I would say I would put myself as a sort of social justice advocate. That's what I was. And I will, at the risk of being partisan, there was a provincial government that got in with an even larger majority when I was about 45 than it had even the previous time of election and here in Ontario. And I was so profoundly shocked, as were all my social justice colleagues, profoundly shocked. And I suddenly thought, you know what? I better make it my business to find out what other people are thinking. I know what I'm thinking, and I know what all my pals, I wasn't a Ryerson social worker, I was a UPT social worker, but I know how we all think. And that set me on a very, very interesting journey to try and understand how other people are seeing the same things that I'm experiencing every day. And it has given me a tremendous interest in the concept of empathy, which is one that's very, very central to Ashoka, but even equally in curiosity. And I think curiosity about what causes things, why things stay the same, why they don't change, is absolutely fundamental, and it can't ever end. I can't even barely remember when I was 40, but I know I'm so that's one thing I'd just like to put out there. The other is in the sort of 6 months or so that I've been at Ashoka, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot about what our Ashoka Fellows in other parts of the world are doing. We have 53 here in Canada. They're all terrific. But we have over 600 in India. We've got about 300 in Brazil. And certainly the populations in these countries are much bigger, and they've been at it longer. But I wanted to just go back to something Rick said. The entrenched infrastructure that we have and the institutional approach to solving social problems that is so much part of our Canadian culture, I think to date has dampened the progress of social innovation, and I don't quite know how you get past that. I've spent the last 7 years in healthcare. There's some really innovative stuff happening in healthcare, but as soon as it hits an institution, it kind of grinds to a halt, or it gets twisted into something that serves the ends of the institution. So I'd just like some comments on the sort of curiosity factor, the importance of understanding how other people are approaching things, and also this, what do we do in a country like Canada, where we've always said we've been even more institutionalized than, for example, the United States. You know, the old story about the West being very orderly settlement governed by the RCMP. We didn't have such a Wild West. We've just been a very orderly institutional type of country. I think it's wonderful that Canadians are starting to feel pride and potential that they could be innovators, but I see that it's hard given our long history. So I'm just going to put those out, but I also, if you say I don't care less about what you said, Susan, I want to speak to Alison about what she said. Feel free to do that too. And we'll spend about maybe 10 minutes talking like this, and then I'll open it up. So I don't know if anyone wants to go first.
I just pick up on your last point, and I'd like to address them all, and cover a dozen points from everybody who's spoken.
Really, your great-great-grandfather invested in Toronto? That's
The coolest bit of
You want to hear the craziest thing? You know who his jail guard was? You want to hear a crazy bit of his? This is really crazy. John Wilkes Booth.
No.
John Wilkes Booth was Thaddeus's jail guard, and he used to talk to him on the way out. So he became a famous actor, then assassinated Lincoln in 1964.
We're going to ask you to sing John Brown's Body.
I mean, it's crazy. I'm sitting
Everybody
here.
knows
Look
it.
up.
That's the most impressive genealogy I've
It's
heard. Okay, I just want to take on this point about Canadian institutional intransigence. First of all, while it's true in Canada, I think we have to recognize that this is now a global problem. And it's a natural problem. If you actually study systems and systems change, whether we're talking about biological and natural systems or social systems, political systems, organizational systems, they are innovative and highly adaptive in their genesis stages, and as they become more organized, they actually become less able to adapt. So, and a lot of people have looked at this. With one of our colleagues in the social innovation think tank that I set up between McGill and DuPont, C.S. Halling, Buzz Halling, has looked at this. It's very, very, very interesting. But if like the World Economic Forum, for example, that looks at some of the greatest risks in today's world. I mean, there are the obvious ones of economic instability, terrorism, climate change, and so on. But the underlying risks are our lack of institutional capacity to adapt to a very new set of not only problems, but possibilities. I mean, we're not only facing an apocalyptic future. There's a new set of possibilities, but at an institutional level, which means, therefore, at a leadership level, at a paradigm level, at a managerial level, at a deep structural level, including investment flows and ideas of what return on investment are, and at a legal level, we have structures that make it very difficult for us as social organisms to adapt to the scale of change that we need. It's very true in Canada. It's where some of my frustration at what's happening in social innovation comes from, because the argument that we used to have on the think tank a lot, it was the think tank. I approached Frances Wesley to start this think tank. She had just run, and she's a great friend and a great colleague, and I'm a huge admirer of hers. She had run the McConnell program, the McGill-McConnell program on voluntary sector leadership. McConnell is now heavily invested in the field of social innovation. As a funder, and this goes to your point too, Michael, about philanthropy, there's a world of funding that relates to NGOs. And so there's a mindset behind that, which is that NGO capacity, because NGOs sort of have the agenda of social issues, that NGO capacity is what we need in order to address our challenges. But in fact, my argument was we didn't need organizational capacity, we needed a societal capacity to organize in a different way. The kind of social innovation that I'm interested in is actually about trying to tackle large problems at scale, not simply find small innovations that we can scale up. Scale is a really important question. Do you want to work at scale with the kind of hybrid expertise that you need to achieve scale impacts, or do you want to work in a boutique way? I mean, both are valid, but in order to address the institutional intransigence that we've got, I think that what we need profoundly here is a true culture of innovation. And last point, early childhood development, that's what I'm working on in Winnipeg now, in a neighborhood in Winnipeg which had the highest concentration of urban Aboriginals anywhere in the country, is one of the most, suffered some of the worst social pathologies anywhere in the country, and has just about the worst early childhood development outcomes, which we know then is, pretty much not a guarantee, but is that, poor early childhood indicators are one of the strongest predictors for a life of and high social costs. We have set out within one generational cohort, in other words, within 7 years, to change to have a breakthrough, to go from fewer than 50% of those kids meeting minimum developmental standards to over 80% within 7 years. Our starting point is we don't have a damn clue, I'm going to use a stronger word, what to do. Everybody's got ideas, but I'm actually fanatical about outcomes and agnostic about inputs. And we have created, with the government, with McConnell Foundation, and with leading corporations in Winnipeg, an innovation investment fund that has enabled us to create a lab where we can bring together the diverse expertise to try to solve this problem, and we've given ourselves 1 year to work out the solutions. There is, in the whole field of social innovation, hardly any. There was so much talk about innovation, but there is no investment. I don't mean only financial investment, but managerial investment in the structures that are necessary to pursue disruptions. I'd love to come back on this with you, Michael, because this is where there's a difference between the expectations of philanthropy and the expectations of an investment in innovation.
Great. Wow. I also think that, again, as I grew up in the not-for-profit world, I thought that we owned social purpose work, but we don't. We don't own the problem, so we don't own the solutions. We have to stop this bifurcation. We have to think about how do we get, and poor Michael, you're representing all of capitalism, congratulations.
No, I am too.
But as am I, but I'm making a point, which is how do I get the skills and expertise of someone like Michael, the brains and intellect and experience of someone like Greg, and how do I throw you all together to redefine problems, because I don't think we've even got the problem definition right before we even get to solutions. But historically, we didn't. I mean, again, Susan will tell you, Susan and I met when we co-chaired METRAC, which is a anti-violence group for women. That's when we met. So we go back a long way around this. There were no corporations around that table. There was no government around that table. There was no academia around that table. There was a bunch of us all trained to think exactly the same way. We were going to solve the problem? I'm not so sure. So I think this sort of multi-sectoral kind of approach and bringing these different people who think really fundamentally differently together is our hope. I think it's our hope. The final thing I'll just say real quickly, which is about scale. Often when we think about scale, we think about replication. We think about the McDonaldization of a social, like with pathways to education, what we're trying to do around that, instead of understanding what is the actual essence of what these innovations are, and how do we scale those instead of doing replication of franchises. So I leave those out there, all of which we can talk about a lot more.
Roger or Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add
Chime
my
in
2
before
cents.
we-
I think Canada needs to do more to cultivate, to foster innovation to solve big global challenges. So for example, Stanford and MIT have a Center for Extreme Affordable Design for the base of the pyramid. So students are creating innovative solutions to address food, water, climate change. They've invented affordable water filters, drip irrigation kits, etc. They're creating jobs within America, and they're the research and development, all the innovation is happening in Palo Alto, whereas the market is overseas. So I would like to see that type of innovation accelerated here in Canada. So Waterloo, for example, would be perfect for those kinds of innovations.
Ryerson too.
Ryerson,
Yeah.
yes.
Michael?
Do you want to go?
I think we should probably. Okay, I will take questions. Now, there are quite a few people, so try and keep your question focused and as sort of briefly as you can. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Brazilian, and I study a program of rainwater systems over there that now, and a partnership between 800 NGOs in the northeast of Brazil and the Brazilian government, which is with the left door now. We are building up to 1 million cisterns, and now it's 700,000 people. But it's a big revolution in this area. So the issue of scale is dealt with, but also you could see the effect of the small NGOs working for 20 years in the region. When they finally find a partnership with the government, the pen explodes, right? So my question for you is, except for Alison, to talk, in order to have this bigger scale, what's the role of governments, right? Because we didn't talk about government. And also a question for you, Rick. You talk about the NGOs and the limited outcomes of NGOs. We talk also about the sometimes invisible outcomes of NGOs. In the case of Brazil, for instance, 20 years of people learning that to have rights. And this mattered a lot. And strengthening the NGOs, this mattered a lot to reach at this point now where people are ready to work together and create this big change.
Who wants to handle that first one about the role of government? I'm looking at you, Raju, because
That's a very touchy subject, so there's lots of debate. I think there's arguments both for and against government intervention. I know that Dambisa Moya has written a book called Dead Aid, where she has been very critical about the role of governments in Africa in canalizing international development funds. So,
well, her way of thinking has had quite an influence too in terms of the way our government here in Canada is thinking about international aid too, and the sense that it has to be more closely tied with economic development. I think that sort of shift in thinking is well and alive here in Canada. Rick, did you want to?
Well, I don't think that, I'm thinking with Raju on this, I don't think that there's a simple answer. I mean, we have governments, in fact, to be able to organize, to address some of the economic, societal, and security challenges that we face. By the same token, governments, I think, are almost always, and quite necessarily, pretty conservative. Regardless of their politics, they're conservative in the approaches that they can take. Brazil is interesting because, my understanding is that in Brazil there have actually been, what Brazil did, and Brenda Zimmerman, who's one of our colleagues at the Social Innovation think tank, looked at what Brazil did to organize against spread of AIDS when the World Health Organization estimated that AIDS would spread more rapidly through Brazil than it was through South Africa. So there was an extraordinary organizing both at the grassroots level, so that infrastructure or ecosystem of NGOs at the grassroots level is very, very important in Brazil, very important in Canada, and probably very important throughout the world. I think that what I had hoped that our early social innovation work would do was to encourage governments to play more of an investment and enabling role in the development, not of social enterprise, but of being able to fund the kind of developmental work that's necessary for large-scale change efforts. I've seen it in Manitoba because we actually did manage to get the government to partner in this fund and then to say, yes, we're hands off. And it's very difficult to change the rule set around this. It's an incredibly difficult thing, but I think the government has some resources that they can apply in investment.
Susan, I just want to say something really quick about that. Allison, you speak first. So I grew up in Ottawa, and like Susan, I brought up the social justice movement. I marched on Parliament Hill. I got there and I realized they didn't know what the hell to do with me. They didn't have the answers. They didn't have the answers. And so I think this goes back to sort of some of the stuff I'm talking about. I think government should be at the table. They have an important role to play, but they are not the ones sitting at the head of the table, setting the table. So I think that's how I was thinking of it. But it's been a change for me. I used to just start, if I only get them to do that, I'm thinking much more broadly about systems change.
And this is what's happening, not everywhere, but in some instances in Brazil as well. We have these councils that come from the grassroots and to advise the government in terms of policies and directions. And I think that's why it's working. Conversation.
We've got this lady here, and Allison.
Well, I'd just like to go on San Diego, also Brazilian. And what I think, and I would like to ask you about that, I think if we really need to stay, and I do believe we have to stay, we need to go home. That's someone that I miss here. I think that this panel should be even better if it could get on, because without policies, I think it's very hard to stay. I work in the boutique side, as you do, because I work in design school and we work with small groups. And the idea is that, well, if it can work here, then maybe we could get attention of the politicians and try to stay from that.
Why do you keep saying that? Like, what has government ever done well? I think they screw up everything. And to be honest, the only thing I want is lower taxing to get out of my way. I think that, you ever talk to a politician? They're so vapid. I mean, they're so, really, come on. I've been dealing with people for years. If I want to go build a school or do something, we do it. And I think there's so many instances of just getting up and doing something or trying to get into big social change. The word innovation and government don't mix. That's crap. They just don't do it. We like to think we are. Ryerson has this great thing called the DMZ over there where they have all these startups. All levels of government have literally toured it and claimed that they're reason for the success. That's not true. It's because of a bunch of people that disrupted and built that and have all these startups in there pumping out startup companies, people getting together, building things that are great. Nothing to do with our government, but there's not a premier or prime minister or whatever that's not saying we did this. They didn't, right? I just think that it's very unlikely that you really want the government on this panel or part of it.
I pretty much see disruption in the government also, and I pretty much see the government working with the people so that disruption could really exist and that they would go from
People who think about government differently. There are people who think like you, that, okay, that's who they are and that's it. And there are people who have been working a long way to change this, and they believe differently that
Yeah, but you're also,
Can I
there's
just-
layers, right? No, but there's layers, because when our government wants to do things or not, there's all these things that are happening behind the scenes, and what you're learning is how governments between our country and other ones are communicating. They don't even hit the public, right? And what they do is not, what you see in the media is not really necessarily what happens, right? There's tons of backroom politics going on, trade, you see it all the time. You look at, stuff going on in Ukraine, you see it up in Africa, it's all, I don't think we actually know. All I'm saying is that I think things can get done when people in this room do things. I'm not entirely sure. I think we're waiting for Godot, waiting for the government to do something.
I'm just going to ask Rick if you could unbundle briefly what positive contribution the government has made in Manitoba that's helped you move ahead. You don't have to, but it seems to me that's a practical. You just said that the government has set things up in such a way that it can work.
I'll do that quickly, and I just want to address this. First of all, we found a brave politician and brave bureaucrats. My friend Buzz Halling said that if you want real social change at a large scale, you need to find a brave bureaucrat. There were, at the level where people had some power and decision-making ability, they were willing to agree that the outcomes that were being achieved were not acceptable and that doing more of the same was not going to produce a different set of outcomes. And even if they doubled the amount of money, which was for sure not going to happen because Manitoba government was going through the most severe period of process of constraint in all time, that they weren't going to achieve the outcomes that they wanted. So somewhere there was a willingness among a few people to say, maybe we have to think differently and we have to do differently. And then I watched, because we managed to make the case for what I would call a disruptive innovation approach that would require a structured investment and a structure in which this innovation could happen. Not a fund that would become a typical government fund with money being dispensed to a bunch of small players who had ideas, and then it becomes politicized and vapid instantly. We managed to convince, with McConnell's money on the table, we managed to convince the government that that should happen. And I watched as this was stick-handled through cabinet, and there were more battles, media battles, community battles, but it actually happened. Now we have to prove ourselves. Now we've got a runway of 1 year, and as I say to my team, there is nothing in our way except us. So we'll see if we can achieve it or not. We've got no one to blame. We have what we asked for to try to build this innovation. But Michael, on your point, I think that there's a larger point, which is that we are in an era where we have lost, and I think for some legitimate reasons, we have lost faith in the possibility of public purpose, not social purpose, public purpose and large public projects. There was a time, it was naive, but there was, post-war, and we were flush. But where government actually helped to create the Internet to Space program, in Canada the health program, we actually organized at a level, and publics believed in it. There were, the conditions were right for that to happen. Now we have all lost our faith that can happen. But this is where it gets dangerous, because we do have to. I was involved with this Metrolinx project. As a consultant. Right, we have one of the largest infrastructure projects in the world, one of the biggest expenditures that our generation, your generation, is ever going to make on something that is going to shape the future in this region. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that mobility will be for the 21st century what digital was for the 20th century, and the regions that get it right are going to be the successful regions of the world, and the ones that don't are actually going to get stuck in some very expensive, ill-adapted system. Well, and there are good people in there, but my God, the damper on thing, I used to say to them, just do this thought experiment for 5 minutes. Imagine that Google was running this project, or Apple. How would we be thinking about what a mobility system in this region would be? Why can you not take a tiniest bit of money that you are already spending on this and create a safe environment where this kind of thinking, which is disruptive thinking, can happen? We could become the Silicon Valley of mobility in the world. We could generate huge wealth, we get innovation, but here, the dampening effect of government and the lack of courage is what prevented that from happening. And so we will make enormous expenditures and probably get shot for something else. But, here you see how government actually failed to take on. In our era, in your era, where you've all grown up, for us to be pessimistic about human ingenuity is the craziest pathology we can imagine. We're capable of so much.
Okay, I'm just going to let some more questions come. So, Allison?
I'm Allison Kemper. I'm on the faculty here. I also cut my teeth in the nonprofit sector along with those two, right? In the past week, there has been reporting on an article about to be published in Ecological Economics, in which there's finally applied math of a scale that allows us to look at systems issues around social systems and around environmental systems simultaneously. And when these systems are analyzed together, it is clear that the level of resource inequality in the world and the increasing polarization of the very few with much and the many with less. And it is a highly unstable condition. We also see increasing risk due to climate change, disastrous risk. And what these folks who did the study have identified is within 15 years, not longer, we're not looking at 2100 or later. Within 15 years, we are going to see institutional and social collapse of a scale that will make us unable to achieve the changes we need to reduce the risk of climate change. And we can certainly see that, in the example of Metrolinx. We cannot make the changes to reduce our own carbon emissions here in Toronto because of bizarre notions, bizarre social and political notions. So what I'm hoping to glean from you folks is a sense not just only of scale, but of speed. How do we put social innovation on steroids? How do we say these kinds of systems thinking are absolutely critically important to our task here as just regular folks trying to do things in Toronto? How do we say that this is enormously urgent and we can't just think about social innovation, we have to gin it up big time?
Can I comment on this?
Sure.
Sometimes this drives me nuts. Look, when you go to the grocery store, do you guys pay $3 more for the green solution? No, you don't. You buy the Tide, it's crap, it's phosphates, but it's $3 cheaper. And that's what some of you guys do, but to be honest, most people don't. People in this room may, but most people don't. The reason why we have carbon emission problems is people can suck and blow at the same time. If we wanted to solve this, it would cost a lot more money, but people don't want to pay $3 for the gasoline. And the thing is that at the heart of this, and I want to answer this Google thing, is that a government employee goes to work and goes 9 to 5 and then goes home, has no bonus, no incentive, nothing. Guy at Google is driven like a mad person, and they have stock, they have incentive that drives human nature. Humans tend to be greedy. Whether you like it or not, most people are self-driven animals that are greedy. Just because we're in this room and we're talking social, you don't represent the entire city. Millions of people out there will not pay $3 more for the green solution. There is an economy to it. And I hate it, and I agree with you. And I think, yeah, we are destroying our environment, and it's ridiculous. And in 15 years, absolutely, we're going to have wild climate changes, and we're going to go much more cold here, much more warm here. You're totally right. But there's a behavior problem. And the behavior problem is that we're still inherently greedy, and we're still inherently not willing to pay the money that we're going to have to pay to make those changes. For example, the reason why solar power, if we have more solar power hit a solar farm in a day than do the entire planet, we can't even get the legislation to move that power across 56 different legislations. We can solve all these problems, but you have lobbyist groups, you have crappy television ads about clean coal.
Which is why this
right?
is the social innovation model up for it? That's my question.
Yeah, but are we up to paying more money?
Solutions?
Right, but are we up to paying more? Will we actually get people to pay more?
Well, can we create, imagine incentives to do this?
So let's just put it, we've heard, being reminded that we did get people to stop smoking in classrooms like this. How can we bring about the kind of behavior change that will mitigate against the risks to the environment? Rick? Alice?
Okay, I'll go after you.
I started life as a social marketer. Behavior change was always a question I was trying to focus on. How do we get people to do X? And it wasn't until I made the leap from the behavior of individuals to the behavior of systems, I started to think about systems change, and that's what led to my interest in the kind of social innovation I'm interested in. I love your question, which is, is the social innovation model right for tackling this kind of thing? And I think it is a fundamental question for this panel and for us to be thinking about at Ryerson. I would say no, that social innovation, but it could be. But if we started to take these scale problems seriously, so made a distinction between social enterprise work, which is very valid and interesting, and of course there's a lot to learn, and then actually got serious about social innovation that was focused on large-scale system transformation. Then we would start to look and draw our intelligence from examples of large-scale change. I've tried to argue this before. I always feel like it's falling on deaf ears. In China, so not just a smoking example, in China there was a millennium of foot binding for women. Probably in that period of time, over 2 billion women had their feet bound. Terrible thing. It was, it was absolute repression of women. It was painful. It was weird and destructive in so many ways, but so entrenched in the normative structure of that society, it was impossible to shift. In 15 years, at the turn of the century, and there had been various attempts, in 15 years, there was a transformation from foot binding everywhere, just as in about 15 years, the smoking everywhere to smoking almost nowhere shift has happened. When we look at the spread of innovation, when we look at, that's why I use the example of the cell phone. That is a radical disruption in systems. Radical. That did not require everybody to be educated in the value and the wherewithal of using digital phones. There was a innovation in pricing and distribution and laws, but large-scale disruptions are possible. The point I'll make, and the reason I say I don't think that the social innovation model yet is appropriate for these intractable problems, but it could be, is that when and it was in cultures like DuPont, what I saw was they're not afraid of these big questions and big possibilities. In fact, a guy that I knew who was CEO at DuPont used to argue over drinks with fellow Canadian CEOs. He'd say, you know what, climate change is real. This is real. I mean, it's not just, green people have to, this is real. Okay, let's deal with it. And we can make a shitload of money as well, but there are, if we have a market versus anti-market idea, if we have an idea that the social sector owns the agenda and therefore is the source of all of the competencies for bringing about this change, we're missing the point. We have society-wide challenges, and we need to understand how to develop working paradigms, working cultures, structures, and investments that will enable this kind of work to get done.
You've been trying to get your point in here.
And first of all, I'm completely overwhelmed at the amazing information from this panel. My name is Sarah Drew, and I actually started a company called Everyone Games, and we're teaching video game design to teens and adults on the autism spectrum to help them develop the social and professional skills that they need for transitioning into post-secondary school into a career in creative industries. Our social change is about neurodiversity, right? It's about understanding that just like women had to go through these shifts that you're speaking of right now, there's an autistic population with different brains that are going through that same shift. But with history repeating itself, I don't see a reason why we should have to go through 20 years of arguing the point that was already established with women and the shifts that had to take place to understand that women were capable of leadership in the same way that people are now looking at neurodiversity and people on the spectrum in leadership positions. I think my question is more about when you said that we can't go on with existing systems, and the systems that we have right now in the autism space, it's not that they're not working, it's that they're not there. They don't exist in the adult sphere. So it's hard to justify because there's not a lot of research in where I'm working, and we're doing a lot of new and experimental things, and I'm from the I'm from the more art background of video games, and I've been working with autism for 10 years, and it was just that what I was doing with my students was working. And now I'm in this world of figuring out our next step for social change, which are actually multiple steps all at the same time, and each one of you kind of nailed it in a different way as to what we're doing. How do you change, we are working within an ecosystem of organizations, and we are trying to create that industry, but we're also doing it trying to meet the needs of the institutions that we're working with. Because having that social innovation, having that social background isn't enough for businesses, and I learned that very early on. is that you need to meet the needs of these institutions, even working with schools, even working with the government. The government has goals. They have things that they're working on. And if we can somehow help them get their needs by them helping us, then that's how we'll do it. I don't know if I have a...
I think Allison is your...
Yeah, Allison, I was kind of, this sounds like Mars territory.
I mean, I think a lot of things, so much, you're right, there's lots of opportunities for discussion. Yeah, so yeah, we have a lot of people working in the autism space dealing with exactly the same kind of challenges you are, right? Do you know Special Easter?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So Special
They're
Easter,
part of our ecosystem.
right, so Special Easter is a guy whose son has autism, he's Danish, son has autism, and he works in a high-tech company, so he works like Michael.
And he's an Ashoka Fellow.
And he's recently in a shock fellow, so I'm getting to that part too. And so he was saying, you know what, he has trouble with, he's got a lot of repetitive tasks in his industry, and he can't keep people in the jobs, and yet they're well-paying jobs, they're not the sheltered workshops of days gone by, right? And so he goes home and he sees his son that night who's doing a repetitive task, and he puts the two together and says, how do I not create something that's, you know, just an entry-level job that doesn't mean much? He said, how do I create a high-tech, high-value, high-paid job for my son? And he puts the two together and comes up with the specialist, right? So the kid is named the specialist, not the I'm giving you charity, right? The specialist, and so has helped redefine that. So we have a lot of folks in the autism. I'm happy to speak with you about this later. Rick and I also have a colleague by the name of Alec Mansky, who has worked with people with disabilities, has a child with disability as well. And another Ashoka Fellow, Susan, I got this one in ahead of you this time, another Ashoka Fellow guy, Alec Mansky, came up with the Registered Disability Savings Plan. So this is like taking the RESP that you have, but applying it for folks with disabilities, but it's not clawed back by government. And it's fundamentally changed how we think about people with disabilities as being able to acquire and own assets. So fundamental, right, to how we think about that. So lots of wonderful, and I think that's a systems change kind of approach.
It's funny because there's that issue that we have with that is that the parents are the ones who are consistently putting that in place for their children. And so with working with teens in this adult system that doesn't exist is giving, we want to create a place where you as an adult or as a 19-year-old or 18-year-old don't have to rely on your parents to do that for you. And that's like where that's kind of breaking down.
No, I think it can go there, right? I mean, I think it can go there, and that's the intention of it, is how do we give people a good life? And so if you start early, it's with kids. As they could become teenagers and adults, it's their opportunities to create that. But that opportunity didn't exist before. Any kind of money that was given to you was clawed back, right? Which is ridiculous. I just wanted to say, in terms of the whole big, sort of going back to Allison's question, I think we need to meet them where they're at. So for example, with the province of Ontario, I've been trying to talk systems, I've been trying to talk social innovation, and what I get is social enterprise, because that's what they understand. So they put out a strategy paper on social enterprise. That's where their head is at. Now, do I have that's my thin edge of the wedge. That's my opportunity to begin to even have some of these conversations. So a lot of it is all meshed up in there. But when I talk social innovation, their eyes glaze over. If I start to talk at Rick's level, it's like, what are you talking? Disruptive, changing systems. I can't even begin to get my head around it. It feels like it's not accessible. It feels like it's not doable. It feels like you're immobilized. So it's like, where do we create opportunities? Where do we meet people where they're at? And where we can create opportunities for systems change to emerge. And in some places, like, so if Michael is at the place around understanding the market, so where can we create market opportunities? We're doing good actually as a market opportunity as well, right? Again, where we try to find those wonderful opportunities. One of the examples is Cisco. Cisco had a labor constraint and they didn't have enough network administrators. So they went into like 165 countries, they set up 10,000 academies, they trained millions and millions of people in a very short period of time that met that labor constraint, but also had massive social impact in terms of the job creation, where people were able to get jobs now all over the world. They had a different level of mobility. So where can we stop thinking right, wrong, black, white, but creating both economic and social impact? I have lots more, but I'll shut
I'm just
up.
looking to see if there are any other people who I've missed who want to ask a question or make a comment. Yes?
Hi, Fiona Ito from the School of Nutrition and the Center for Studies in Food Security. And I have a question. I work I work in the space of food systems. And one of the challenges is that I think is what you're saying here, is some of the problems that have been created are as a result of the current system. And the solutions are being, the social entrepreneurship solution is using the same kind of ideology that caused the problem in the first place. So how do you navigate that?
Who wants to try and respond to that?
How do you disrupt when what people understand is the status quo?
How do you help them see other possibilities? Is that how do you open their minds up to other possibilities? Is that sort of what you're trying to, do you want to try that?
We start with piloting a project within the community. So these are people that have no idea what is.
I'm not talking about the beneficiaries, I'm talking about the people that can support it. To not necessarily scale it up, but have it.
You mean the funders?
Yes.
So how do you educate funders?
Yeah. Decision makers with power.
That's an ongoing challenge. Let's put it that way. There's no easy answer to that question.
We are in an environment in Ontario with our provincial government, all governments I would say, where there's a tremendous risk aversion. It's in fact gone, in my view, so far over to the risk aversion side of the scale that it's creating a whole new risk, which Rick mentioned the Metrolinx example. And I actually think this is a very, very serious problem that we have. And it's very, I'm speaking just my own opinion, it's a very, very difficult problem to try and resolve. If you frame it as, how do you introduce into the Ontario Civil Service a sense of adventure, a sense of what could be, of thinking outside the box. And it's not just bashing of civil servants. Every single time, this is my little rant, but every single time there is a risk that's taken that goes sour, the media is all over it. And I'm not talking about criminal activity, I'm talking about, taking an honest risk. And I just find that this culture is pretty dug in, and I'd be interested in any of the panelists' reactions to what can be done about that, because I think it is a culture change that's needed, and I think it's at the heart of what you're talking about.
Can I actually say something?
Sure.
So I think that there's something more about attitudes and culture shifting. And when you say the people who hold the power and the decision makers, I just think of us as being those people. Like every person has that opportunity to take responsibility and make a choice. And for us to separate ourselves from the people that we elect to represent us and see that as an us and them is somewhat problematic. Same with the people we're trying to help. And I'm not saying that we are all one and we should all work together necessarily. It's much more complex than that. And we have to be able to recognize who we are first and foremost. And then by being able to empower ourselves, we're able to recognize the differences of the other people that we're dealing with and recognize that they're coming with different interests. The value to them is going to be different. And until we can sort of agree on areas where we're all going to find value, it's going to be hard to mobilize. So it starts with looking at yourself and then reflecting that into the greater sphere.
Did you want to build on that?
Well, I just say, I think it's not just the values. I work for the Drug Resource Center, which is the School of Early Childhood Education, and we provide supports in the community. So we're a community-based organization affiliated with the university. And I don't think it's just about the values. We're going through, it's interesting that you almost all talked about early childhood education in some capacity, because the whole system in Ontario is going through a complete metamorphosis in terms of bringing sectors together from different disciplines: health, education, family support, and early learning and care. And we're coming together, and we are trying to work. And it isn't just about our values. We want to make this work. It's about the resources and the capacity within the organizations themselves when we're expected to be on the ground delivering services to the families and kids we serve, while at the same time working to transform the system. Can't be in two places at the same time. If I had, with all due respect to DuPont, if I had $1 million in the bank, I would have no problem taking the risk. You know, if I had a nice budget, would give me $1 million, I would be out there integrating us. Well, we are doing it. I'm doing it anyway. I'm taking a risk. But I just think it's also about the capacity within the different organizations to actually go out there and sit together and work and strategize and problem solve. It's a long, long process. It's not
Which
overnight.
has to do with money and the ability to communicate between those parties.
Yes, but if you can't get in the community because you're in your job caring for children, what are you supposed to do? Tuck them to the floor while you're out in the community trying to integrate. The people that need to be sitting at those tables strategizing are caring for children and families.
I can see that a couple of our panelists are signaling that they're dying to get into this, so can we, but quickly, because I see some other hands on the other side too, and we're running out of time.
I'd love to talk to you actually afterwards about the DuPont thing because it wasn't the money. It was a culture of problem solving that let them make that leap. In response to what to say about funders, I think let's
And I'm talking funders broadly, I'm not just talking about.
yeah, let's be on. Okay, let me try to be provocative and honest. Fuck 'em. I mean, you can't, but there is and if we're talking about real disruption and innovation is disruption, then you actually have to take some lumps, and you are going to be running into people, organizations, and power that can't hear what you're saying or can't respond to what you're saying. And with all, I mean, I understand that thin edge of the wedge, but the problem is that we stay at the thin edge when we've got problems of the kind that are being talked about up here. And that the thin edge of the wedge actually sometimes does not become the thick edge of the wedge. We just keep doing, and we spend public money and public goodwill and public energy as though we are addressing the deep problems of our time, when in fact we are just playing at the surface. This is why I think we need a much more ambitious and aggressive approach for social innovation. I think the Ryerson can be the home of that new paradigm, in which there's hard work to make people actually to simplify descriptions of complexity. One thing I know is that I'm not afraid of complexity. I run into those problems that you talk about in government, but at the same time, whether it's Metrolinx or government's response to the healthcare crisis, which will bankrupt us all, you know, then to see the trivial approaches that are taken, none of us, and here I agree with Shira, this is our world, it is our moment in history, and we collectively have to be more ambitious about our belief in the possibility of public purpose and our competency and efficacy in your generation, the ability to actually believe not that this is some intransigent force, but that we can help to drive a culture of innovation. Cultures of, I gave a paper in England 10 or 15 years ago called Accountability Regimes versus Adaptability Regimes. And we have become increasingly dominated by accountability regimes, which I would describe this way. It's as though somewhere along the road, purpose and process got a divorce, and process kept the house. So let's not abandon our high purpose and call it nice names like social enterprise or social innovation. If we're serious about meeting the challenges of our time, then let's have the courage to take
Okay,
it.
so my response is we don't know how to do that, right? I mean, okay, so let me just, society, let me back up a second. I ran a shelter called Youth Without Shelter. It is the first suburban shelter in the city. I would take a knife from a kid who came in the door, I would try to feed them, I would beg, borrow, and steal, and then I'd get someone from United Way say, oh, what are you doing to address homelessness? And I'd say, oh, freaking kidding? I kept the kids safe for the night. So I know how challenging that is. I know when you're doing it. But then that's when we started to create networks. But we started to just talk to each other. And so what I'm saying is let's go to the next level. And let's think about what are the systems that cause those kids to come into the shelter in the first place. And how do I have different brains coming to the table to think about that? That's what I'm encouraging us to do. One of the things I did for government in terms of your question is I said, you are afraid to take risks. It's too challenging, the costs are too high. So how do we buffer? How do we buffer that risk? How do we invite you into a place, and so I'm coming from the world of Mars, unintended, but we're giving you an opportunity to come in and play with us, where if it succeeds, you get the credit, and if it fails, it's cool with us because that's what we're supposed to be doing. So, pardon? It's partially funded by the government. It's also funded because we have a big building, we rent out the space. That's how we make money as a social enterprise. And so it's a bunch of other kinds of things that it, but it's got many, many levels of funding. But the thing is that we said is we want you to come and play, because we study labs around the world. Some were in government, some were in academia, and I reject actually that academia is the right place for this. I really do. I think they can play a role. Pardon? You can play, academia's got a role, I really believe that, the way I believe government has a role, the way I believe business has a role, the way I believe NGOs do, but I think if it's owned by one kind of sector, it becomes challenging. So the work that I did with the province to get them to think about some of the complex challenges they're facing was monumental. I asked them for a complex challenge, they gave me a communications challenge, because that's how they train to think. So we've worked and worked and worked and worked and worked, and now we've got a couple of things we're playing with, including chronic disease prevention, and what do we do around that. And the final thing is I think think tanks are not enough. We need think and do tanks. And so that's where I think the role of the innovator can come in, and how do we create capacity for those who are thinking differently and who do have innovation to come into that space, because we've got to have our feet in the soil, and we've got to have our hands reaching for the stars. That's what I think is going to make this stuff happen.
We're kind of on a roll with these inspirational messages. Maybe given that it's 4 o'clock, do you and Michael want to sort of give any sort of final comments? I don't see a lot of other hands waving, and I think. Sorry, did you?
I was just going to say, Mike could speak a bit more about that, because I think we're missing a crucial conversation, even if between your relationship. First of all, are you a not-for-profit, Reggie?
Yes, we are. We're a charitable organization.
Because one of my decisions that I'm in right now is to incorporate as not-for-profit or not, and then the introduction of benefit corporation, and all of these other things that we're all learning about at the same time.
So I have a white paper I wrote on this topic on how to choose your corporate structure based on what particular situation.
Perfect. That's what I was going to say. So when Mike or a business investor is making that decision, I'm going to invest in this NGO because of this tax credit, and that's what the government comes in. Or I'm going to invest in this for-profit social enterprise for these financial benefits, and it does come back to the bottom line. And I figured that might be the sort of business in the panel there. You could speak to that bottom line because your innovation, you came from, I want to make money, and then I will help with social, so you have that heart there as well. I mean, I'm 25 years old, I need to get a house, I want to have babies, I want to...
Okay, I'm going to we're feeling your eagerness to move ahead, but I think your information will be better handled in a conversation with Allison and maybe Raju afterwards, rather than spending time on it now. And I'm going to go back to Raju and Michael and ask, I think that Rick and Allison have given very sort of interesting final speeches, and I invite you to do the same.
So I just want to close with, we're a voluntary staff organization. We're actively looking for volunteers to help us drive our digital marketing efforts. So if you're interested in joining our team, please check out our website, oneprosper.org, and connect with us. Thank you.
Michael.
Yeah, so just to be clear, when we put money into a foundation, there is no profit. I can never get the money back. It's gone away. So all the work I do with it, all the money I make off it, like I invested in all these stocks, I pump out a lot of cash on it, but I can't touch it. I don't benefit in any way. There is no benefit to me at all. But the hard thing, as I was saying earlier, is that you feel very responsible to place it in good places, and then how do you get certain accountability? And it's much more difficult than you think, because everybody has something, but when you dig into what's the real return, I mean, and I'm talking socially, what's the return? What are you really getting? That's a hard thing. You'd be surprised at some of the conversations I've had with food banks and what have you, which are very, actually, some places are actually just not well run. I mean, that is very hard to invest, as much as that sounds like I'm not being nice. It's just when you ask the questions, you dig down, you find some very strange things. It's not so easy to give away money. There is no benefit to me personally. There is no profit. I do it because we want to. The tax thing is a long, long time ago. What I'll say is, I think you really should take a look at One Prosper. You actually get photographs of these families with these kids. You actually see the families that we actually do. Like, I can name the families and the farms that I'm doing, and I'm going to make a trip over there with you sometime. We're going to look at them. I'm trying to do a school. It's kind of interesting, but that's not everybody's cup of tea. But it's really fantastic what Raju's doing. I think Raju's an extremely brave man too. I think that a lot of us haven't given up our jobs to go and start something because what he saw. I mean, he's truly an entrepreneur and this is a social entrepreneur. None of us really are here. I'm not. We're not. This is. He gives up his job. He has a wife and 2 kids. It's expensive to run that kind of household, and he's dedicated time. He makes horrible money, in fact, nothing. He can't even get this thing going to a point where he can make anything, and maybe in a couple of years he will. All for something he believes in, and I've asked him, why don't you stop, because it costs too much and it's killing you, and he's like, no, I believe in it. So I think he's really the true entrepreneur here in social innovation, so I think he probably deserves a little bit of your time if you can take a look at the website.
Great, nice words. Thanks very much, Michael. So it's my job now to draw this to a close. I understand that there's going to be an email evaluation sent out. If that's not the case, one of you should. And I think it's really important that you watch for this and fill it out thoughtfully. This could be the first in a series of joint symposia between these 2 entities at Ryerson. I am very impressed. I think that the fact that the Faculty of Community Services and the faculty and the MBA program are working together to try and map out this space is uniquely Ryerson kind of thing. I don't know of too many other schools that are taking this approach, so I personally would encourage you to do more of it, but I know that Marilyn and Jabeen are hoping that you will watch for the evaluation and provide some guidance in terms of how to move ahead. I also have been told that many of you have tickets to a reception that's down the hall. Is that right? And I think that's a place to carry on the conversation. I don't know exactly where it is, but I think it's out the door and to the left. Is that correct? Great. So thanks again to our panel. Now I have some things here that Ryerson has provided to you as presents, panelists. You're most welcome, and thank you all very much for coming, and I think particularly thanks to the organizers. That's it.
Thank you, Susan.